everyone, I am back, Erica Desper of Confident Parenting. It's Monday night at 8 p.m. so we are continuing our Ask Us Anything series for expecting new and veteran parents. Welcome back and thanks for joining. All throughout the summer we have a few of these left before this series ends. And for anybody who is watching, just to give you a heads up, our guest for tonight, next week we'll have Dr. Kevin of Focus Chiropractic to talk to us about chiropractic and how it can help with allergies and ADD and ADHD and colic. Hi, Molly. So if you have questions about that, be sure to tune in next week. But tonight, thank you for joining me. I'm excited to welcome Molly Johnson, otherwise known as the Autism Consultant. Let me back up a little bit here. I think I'm higher than usual. There we go. Not even on the screen. Molly, let me just introduce you, is an autism parent consultant working with autism parents to reduce challenging behaviors and break through the barriers holding their child back. And through her Autism Parent Inner Circle, she helps families understand the reason for the barrier, create an action plan to move forward, and teach them how to implement the action plan. I love everything about that. Thank you, awesome. Molly, for joining. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. How are you? I'm excited.
Good. Thanks for making the time, and it's good to see your face. Let me turn my volume up. I think last time we spoke over the phone, but good to see you here. So, first things first, this is a hot topic for parents, right? Lots and lots of kiddos are having these challenges, and lots of parents are receiving maybe diagnoses, which I'm sure can be overwhelming and intimidating. We're not necessarily going to debate why that's happening, but just to help families get the support that they need. Tell us, do you want to tell everybody just briefly how you got into doing what it is that you do?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I actually was an autism teacher, and I've taught at both the middle school and the elementary school levels. And, you know, I was just constantly helping my students' parents outside of the classroom with things that were going on at home. My students' parents would call me and say, hey, my son or daughter is doing this. Have you seen this in the classroom? Or what can I do to help them with this? How can I teach them this new thing? How can I support this behavior that we're seeing? And so one day I thought, oh my gosh, I always wanted to do a podcast, but I never knew what to do it on. I'll help parents. And, you know, if people listen to it, great. If they don't, whatever. And it turned into a thing. And next thing you know, I'm leaving the classroom to support parents, because although there are a ton of supports and services out there for kids, which is wonderful, we definitely need those, there is really a lack of support on the parent side. And there aren't many services to guide parents along the way, because it can be challenging, overwhelming, it can be confusing, it can be isolating, because a lot of times, a lot of the clients that I work with, they say, you know, nobody in my family has an autistic kid, or none of my friends in our friend circle, nobody knows what I'm talking about when I talk about the struggles that we're facing as a family. So I started my group program, the Autism Parent Inner Circle, where we are a supportive group that meets once a week, twice a week actually, and that's where parents talk through what's going on at home. I help develop an action plan with them and basically tell them exactly what to do to make sure they get results. And it's all about moving the child forward, moving them past their barriers, and not only telling the parents what to do, but telling them why it's happening and how we can respond in an appropriate way that fully supports the child. You know, when it comes to behavior, I always say, if our goal is to stop the challenging behavior, we're going to lose before we even begin. We need to first have the goal of understanding your child and the behaviors that they're presenting, and then we move forward with an action plan. So I went from the classroom to supporting parents, and I'm not looking back, because it's wonderful and I love it and my clients love it, and here I am with you now.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your time with parents and with us tonight. So let's not keep everybody waiting. We have quite a few people joining us. We had some questions sent in advance, so we'll touch on some commonly asked questions and some that were submitted by the audience. If you're watching and you have a question, feel free to put it in the comments. I'll try to check and we'll make sure we get to it. Let's dive in. Are you ready?
Perfect. Let's go.
Good. So we're going to start, I think, with some of the we'll start with the moderately challenging behaviors and then get to the things that can be really challenging, like potty training, which is what I help families with. So let's start small and we'll work our way up.
Perfect.
So how can I teach my child to share? And then along with that, another similar question, how can I encourage sharing toys when my son is so particular with toys? So I don't know if you want to do those separate or together.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to teaching a child a new skill, so I'm actually going to kind of generalize this to teaching a child a new skill, but then I'll be more specific with going forward with sharing. So anytime we want to teach an autistic child a new skill, what seems simple to you and I might have a lot of moving parts and might be very overwhelming for a child that is diagnosed with autism. So, there might be 4 or 5 steps that goes into a skill. So if we can break that down into smaller, much more manageable pieces for a child to accomplish one step at a time and make it more of a learning process, we're going to support that child. So back to that example of sharing. So we think of sharing, we're engaging, right now I'm engaging with a toy, I'm playing with a toy. The first step in sharing is giving up possession and then initiating engagement with something else to keep me busy and being able to redirect to something else. So we can break that down into 2 skills. So the first thing I have parents do when we're working on sharing is practice that concept with your child with things that don't really matter, where they are giving up possession. Because a lot of it is control. When they don't want to share something, number 1, they're not used to giving up possession of something, and then number 2, they like the control of having something. So let's say, gosh, I don't know, maybe a child has a washcloth in the bathtub, and you ask your son or daughter to hand you the washcloth. Giving up possession of items that really don't matter, but getting them comfortable with the motion and the release of giving something to somebody else. And then the next skill, and that is being able to move on from one item to another and being able to redirect from one item to another and engage in that second item. So then you're going to practice with that skill when there's not another child in the room, when you're having a child just put down one activity, one toy, and turn and engage with another toy. We have to master those 2 steps before we even bring in a sibling. We need to make sure a child is, they're good to go with those 2 skills, because a lot of times sibling rivalry plays a role too. They just don't want their sibling to have what they're having in their hands. So if we can practice those skills away from the sibling, by the time the sibling comes in, I would say start practicing with something that doesn't really matter to your kid. Again, going back to the washcloth, having Johnny pass the washcloth to David. You have, I don't know, the ketchup bottle on the table. Having Johnny pass the ketchup bottle to David at the table. Things that don't matter in the beginning, and then we move on to things that maybe they like but they don't totally love, and then we'll move on to those really desired items that they really don't want to give possession of.
And is the language important? Are we using the word share on purpose so that later in the harder scenario they're kind of thinking back to when they practiced it before, or are you literally just saying hand?
So the language depends on whatever the parents want to use, but yes, the language is important, because what you say when you're getting your child to share the washcloth and the ketchup bottle needs to be the same as what you're telling your child when they're sharing their favorite Barbie doll. So yes, language does matter. I would simplify the language. Oftentimes we see a child not doing something when we give a direction. So then we sometimes give directions multiple times in many different ways. But when we do that, we're adding more for that child to process. We're not helping anybody, we're hurting the situation. So yes, language matters. Keep it the same and keep it simple.
Got it. Okay, excellent. That's harder for parents, right? Let's practice it. Would make more sense to practice on the play date when it's actually happening, and maybe for a more typically developing kiddo that would work well. But that's the challenge of all this, right? They're functioning differently, so we have to practice it in a safer, simpler setting first.
Yeah, and you have to be much more intentional about planning out, because that's not part of our normal daily routine, is practicing a little skill like that, So I often tell families, I might be talking to a client on a call, we might be talking about them practicing putting something into place tomorrow. that they have to do multiple times. And so I'll tell them, okay, set 3 reminders on your phone for tomorrow. Every time that bell goes off, every time that alarm goes off, take 5 seconds, 15 seconds just to do it. Let your child get used to hearing this new verbiage, this new phrase, or this new activity, and then go on with your day.
Okay, got it. So let's stay on this question for a minute. I'm going to throw things at you that you weren't expecting. I don't know if the mom that posed this question is watching, but I imagine if she is, she might have some follow-up questions. So I'm going to take over her role. Let's say I'm trying to help my child who has autism, and we've been practicing at home, but we're not yet to the point where in a setting with other children it's going to go well. Do I, and my friend's child tries to take something for my child, what's my move there? Do I speak to that child? Do I say something to the parent? What are the words that I say? I know it's kind of uncomfortable when you're around people who don't necessarily understand. So what's a parent to do if they haven't gotten their child to that point yet?
So you're talking about if a child takes a toy from the autistic child.
Or is like expecting them to just share like maybe another kid would.
Okay, so that's more difficult because another parent and child is involved. It's not the child's sibling. So that gets a little trickier because we never want to irritate another parent. We never want to step on parenting toes, so that makes it a little more challenging. So it's all about your comfort level, but then also trying your hardest to redirect your child. Yeah, that's a tough one because then you have a whole new parenting style involved with whoever's with you. And you never know how to go about that. You kind of have to read the room a little bit and see, is the parent going to take that toy from her child and give it back to my child, or do I need to just immediately redirect my child?
Got it. But it sounds like redirection can be pretty powerful and maybe a nice compromise in the meantime.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Always having something extra in your bag, in your backpack or diaper bag that your child loves and will be able to engage in. Absolutely.
Okay, great. And then just briefly, if they're practicing at home, comfortable setting, it's a washcloth, it's a ketchup bottle, and there's a lot of escalation involved when you say, pass me the item.
Yeah.
Would you have the parent press that? Would you have them drop it and come back to it the next time the alarm goes off?
I would add almost no pressure. If the child does it, wonderful. If they don't, that's okay too. Because remember, this is a new skill. And a lot of times us adults put this pressure on these kids because we want it so bad, but we have to remember that it is a new skill. It is okay if it takes weeks for this child to get it. So if a child is not engaging in it at all, we need to look at different options for teaching this. So modeling is going to be a great teaching tool. We all learn from model and imitation. What you do and what people do in front of a child is a lot more effective than what people say to the child. So if the child, this is a great opportunity. If there are siblings, that's what I love. When there are siblings, we use those other kids to our advantage, and we engage them in the learning process too. Let's say we have Johnny and David. You ask Johnny, who's autistic, to hand you the washcloth. He doesn't. You ask David to do it, and David might be able to do it and model that. Then you ask Johnny again. Model and imitation is a really, really, really great way to learn. Also, things like sharing. There's so many YouTube cartoons. We know kids love the iPad. We know they love the computer. It is okay to, put a 3-minute clip of kids sharing. But that's how we learn, model and imitation.
Awesome. And is it fair to say that's because these kids are more visual learners than auditory? So we could throw all the words at them, but it's like really, it's not going to do what we want it to do.
Yes. So actually, so autistic kids have a strength in visual processing and then a weakness in auditory processing. So what you tell them and what they're hearing through their ears is not as effective as what they're seeing with their eyes. So the more visual supports we can give, like somebody, a real person doing it, that's a visual support because they're seeing it with their eyes. The video, that's a visual support. They're seeing it with their eyes. The more we can add in of that type of support, the more we're going to help support that child with what they need. If we only rely on verbally telling a child, we're only relying on their weakness. So then we have to be like, okay, we can't be super surprised when the child isn't catching on as fast as we want because we're playing on their weakness.
And I would imagine if a parent learns well by hearing, this is going to be it's a hard shift to use visual.
Yeah, and it's funny. So I had a client maybe 1 or 2 weeks ago where I had told her, stop talking during this moment. Your homework, you're not allowed to talk during this moment. Anytime this happens, I want you to respond like X, Y, and by doing X, Y, and Z, but you're not allowed to say a word. And she was like, oh my gosh, I can't do that. I said, yeah, I know it's hard, it's frustrating, but think how frustrating your child is. Think how frustrated your child is in that moment.
Yeah, well, and I love that you said that they have, I forget what you just said, strength in, visual processing, because it's so easy to focus on the challenges and the weaknesses, the deficits, however you want to phrase that, but there are going to be those things that they're very strong in that you can use to move these things along. So that's great. Okay, before we move on from sharing, anything you wanted to put out there that we skipped over? And again, anybody watching, feel free to put questions and comments.
I think just going back to skill development, just making it very simple of breaking down a skill into as many smaller, more manageable pieces. At teacher language, we call this chunking the information, including a visual. If you can, you probably can. There are very few skills that I've, heard of parents wanting to work on where we can't present a visual. And then setting aside some time to practice the skill. Often this is what's forgotten, is the time. All we have to take is like a minute here, a minute there, because your child's not going to sit down and work on sharing for 20 minutes. Neither are you. Both of you and your child are going to be so frustrated after 20 minutes. Take 1 minute, 2 minutes, and then you move on.
Okay, awesome. I love it. Thanks for summing that up. Okay, so another really common thing, how to stop aggressive behaviors. I know that comes up a lot.
Yeah, so this is a tricky question because we first need to understand what's going on, why the behavior's there in the first place. So I'm going to kind of glaze over that. That's more specific toward, with each specific behavior. So then let's move on to the second part of we need to start positively reinforcing a child for what they are doing right. Because a lot of times parents will come to me and say, my child is engaging in aggressive or challenging behaviors all day long, from when they wake up to when they go to bed. And I'll tell them, no, they're not. I promise. If you were to put a camera in your house within the first 30 minutes, we would be able to point out 25 things that your child did right, behaved, quote unquote, correctly and appropriately in that moment. And it's all about seeing those, recognizing those moments, and positively rewarding your child for that. Having some reward system to show the child that, hey, it is more worth it for you to engage in these appropriate and good behaviors over the challenging behaviors, and showing the child that they get something out of it, because we're all motivated by something. We have to find what your child's motivated by, work it into a reward system, and positively reinforce them. Token boards are very common within the special education world and the autism community, and that is simply, it's a very visual, here we go again with the visuals, it's a visual representation of what the child's going to earn. So like at the top it says, I'm working for, and then there's a picture that the kid can pick out. Let's say they have 3 pictures to pick from. They have a picture of water play, their marble run, and their Barbie dolls. Let them pick one picture, they put it on their token board to be a constant reminder of what they're working for, and then you are positively rewarding a child with tokens to put on their token board. When they fill up the token board, they get that item. And now the key here is to never take away tokens. We are only positively rewarding kids for their behavior, because a lot of times parents will implement this, and then what I find out is, maybe I don't explain it good enough, but a lot of times people take away tokens. And I'm like, oh gosh, don't do that, because then we communicate that, hey, that hard work that you just did to earn those 3 tokens, it really didn't mean that much because we just took it away, within a split second. We don't want to communicate that. We ignore as much as we can the challenging behaviors, and we're giving tokens for those positive and appropriate behaviors.
Got it.
So positive reinforcement is always the way to go. If I could give one behavior tip for any parent, it is buy in, totally go in full force with positive reinforcement, and you can increase those appropriate behaviors and get rid of those challenging behaviors. Now, it is a process, so I don't want to pretend this is a magic pill. It does, yeah, it does take a few days.
I've been known to say there is no magic. The magic is in the process, right?
Correct. But it feels really magical once you complete a day with your kids and you're like, oh my gosh, there was no hitting today. How cool.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me play, the I'm the parent watching and thinking this through role again. So let's say I've been catching my kiddo being good, and I know you and I keep doing the good like this because we don't want to label behaviors as good or bad. Catch them, doing a desirable behavior. And you're feeling magical, and then of course, they hit their brother or knock over their block tower or whatever. Can you give an easy example of language a parent could use to, I'm sure we don't want to completely ignore it, but we don't want to pay it off with a lot of attention or a big reaction. So what's the move in that scenario?
Yeah, so again, it depends on what the reason is for the behavior. So if the reason for the behavior is attention, they want attention and connection from mom in that moment, that's a lot different than a kid liking the sensory input. Like that smacking feeling for some kids feels so satisfying and so good. So it depends on what the reason is, and that's going to kind of guide us for how we move forward. And it's also hard to say how much you ignore and how much you don't, because it's very much a parental preference. Some parents are going to completely ignore it and remove the other child and just keep that other child at a good distance so they can't do it again because they don't want to buy into that attention in that moment. Because if the kid wants attention, Johnny hits David and he immediately gets mom's attention in that moment, we just positively reinforce that behavior unintentionally. So this is one of those where it's very parent specific. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's like the kid in the park, it's so specific to what that parent will be okay with, and we can kind of make a plan off of that.
And I imagine part of what you're helping families do is figure out why their specific child is doing that specific behavior in that moment, so that you can give a better answer.
Yeah, and if we have a kid who is constantly hitting in order to get attention, we're going to put a plan into place to teach that child to request mom's attention in different ways. If I have a child that is hitting and slapping people for that sensory input, we're putting a plan into place for that child to get similar sensory input so they can still get that smacking feeling, but they're not smacking a person. So we can still give the child what they want. We just have to show them a different way to get this. Yeah. So, I like to say we can make a behavior go away, but we can't make the deep down desire go away, because if the desire is attention, I can make the slapping across the face go away, and so can anybody, but we can never make that deep down desire for wanting mom's connection go away. If we need that our body craves and needs that slap feeling on our hand, we can make the slap on a face go away, but we can't make the desire that our body needs and craves for that sensory input on our hand. We just have to teach them a more appropriate way to get what they want still.
To get that need filled.
Yeah.
Okay. I love that. That's super helpful. I think it's just very hard as a parent to know when your child's, I always say they're not necessarily giving you a hard time, they're having a hard time. Mm-hmm. And just taking that moment to realize that will help you maybe be a bit calmer in how you handle it or how you perceive it. Yeah. But then we still have the challenge of, why are they having a hard time, right?
Yeah.
Do they need the input? Do they need the attention? Are they, hungry, thirsty, tired, whatever?
And
so that's
the child doesn't know how to cope in that moment. No kid wakes up and thinks, I am going to really make my mom mad and I'm going to hit my brother time after time. No kid wakes up and thinks that. They don't know how to cope in that moment. They don't know how to get what they want in that moment. And maybe they haven't been taught in a way that makes sense to them yet. We just have to teach a more appropriate way to get that need met.
Awesome. Excellent. Okay. So on the topic of aggressive behavior, that was super helpful.
Awesome.
Anybody thinking of anything, pop it in the comments. Anything else you wanted to add to that before we move on to transition?
I don't think so. I think we covered it.
Okay, good. Moving right along. So, my daughter has a really hard time transitioning. How do I help with this? I mean, I think this is also one of those every kid. None of these things are specific to these kiddos, right? They're just maybe they happen more often or more dramatically.
Right, yeah, yeah.
You can all use your transition tips. So what about the kiddo who's a little less flexible?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is, again, when I bring in the visual supports. And I recommend that every family that has an autistic child to have some sort of visual schedule. It can be the traditional printed out version that you laminate, add Velcro, or there's so many online versions as well that you can have an app for. That works, just whatever works best for your family. But it's all about providing predictability for these kids and showing them what's coming next, showing them their expectations for the day. You know, if a kid has a hard time transitioning, I 1000% recommend you start using a visual schedule, because that is that child saying, I don't know what's coming next. I don't know when I'm moving on. I don't know what comes on after that. I'm not prepared for the changes. It's too much too soon, and I'm just not prepared for it. So we have to over prepare. And again, we're going to plan that child's visual processing strength with the pictures on the visual schedule. Now, if it's the same transition every day that is a struggle, we're going to use something a little more supportive in that time, and we can do something like a first then chart where there are just 2 activities. It's a visual schedule. It's just a much more simplified version, and you might have under the first side the activity that the child doesn't necessarily enjoy. Let's say teeth brushing. You know, we have to do that. The child might not enjoy it, so we'll put that under the first side. And on the then side of the chart, then we'll put something a little more desirable, a little more preferred, so the child sees that, hey, I'm not brushing my teeth forever. I got to move on. And the next thing is pretty enjoyable. I'm seeing it visually. That's my strength. I know what's coming next. No surprises. And a lot of people will say, okay, but this is an everyday. I mean, we brush our teeth every day. My child knows this is coming. So what do you mean they're not prepared? But I don't know how to fully explain it until you put it into place. And then you're like, oh my gosh, you're right. It does work. But a lot of times an autistic kid thinks that I'm stuck here forever doing this thing that I don't like. They don't realize that there's an end in sight.
Got it. Excellent. Excellent. So let's apply that to a lot of the families I work with. They're obviously trying to improve sleep. Mm-hmm. Can you give an example of how, like, specifically how you'd use that for a kiddo who struggles to get through the steps leading up to sleep?
Yeah, so if sleep is a difficult time in your child's day, I would first start with a solid bedtime routine, and I would put it in the form of a visual schedule. If I have a child that likes control, likes to have a say, that's completely fine. Let's give them some control and let them build their visual schedule. Of course, you know, there are things that need to be in order that you might need to place down, like mom and dad put 2 down, the kid puts 3 down in any order they want. Let them have some say. It's okay to give kids control. We all want control. That's okay. So give them that control. Teach them every night that these are the expectations. You know, there's something about a visual support, a visual schedule. Once it's on paper or the iPad app, it's pretty set in stone. And that's how it comes across to children, that it's pretty set in stone once it's in this visual schedule. And they'll learn that mom and dad mean that this is the expectation. You know, if let's say they don't want mom and dad to leave the room. Every night they're doing something like one more book, and they're just trying to keep mom and dad in there. So if I had a child that was doing that, I might build in on the visual schedule 2 books so that they see, okay, you get more than one. I'm giving in a little, but then also I'm setting the clear expectation that we did the first one, we have 1 more book, and after the last book, it's mom's execute of, you know, kissing on the cheek and saying good night, sleep tight, whatever it is. But once we put it in visual form, it's a lot easier for kids to comprehend and realize that set expectation. And then it's harder for parents to budge on the expectation, because it's there to remind them as well.
That's what I was going to say. I feel like it helps keep us on track too. If there's a picture of 2 books, we're probably less likely to honor that request for one more, because we want to stick to what the chart says as well. So
Absolutely.
That's great.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a question. Do you care if we answer this real quick?
We do. No, go for it. I think it's a perfect segue.
Yeah. Okay, so how do we handle unexpected changes to a visual schedule? So I have a great example of this just happened to one of my clients. So
life happens, right?
Yeah, it just happened. So one of my clients, Elizabeth, she was so resistant to using any visual schedule, any visual support. She didn't want to do it. She was like, this is one more thing for me. I don't have time for it. I don't see the benefit, because she had never used it. There are benefits, but she didn't do it. So then she thought, okay, I'll use this app, a visual schedule on an app, and I don't know the name of the app off the top of my head. I wish I did. There are a lot out there though.
Sure.
She thought, okay, I'll use the app. That's gonna be a lot easier for me. So the mornings were the hardest for her son to transition and get him out the door to pre-K. And so she started implementing her visual schedule in the morning, and she had sent me a message that afternoon saying, oh my gosh, I now realize why you pushed this so hard on us, because our morning completely changed. I didn't think I'd ever see a calm morning like we had this morning, and it was beautiful. So her son was used to using this on the iPad. He moves it over from the to-do to the all done side once he does each activity. So this one particular day, they were going to drop him off at pre-K, and she got to the door, and there was a sign on the door saying there was something wrong with some water issue within the building, and it said drop off is at 9 a.m. instead of 8 a.m. So basically she was like, okay, now I have to tell him pre-K doesn't start for an hour. He's going to be so confused. He doesn't like transitions. He's going to refuse. And he did in the beginning, because she said, okay, we're going to go to mommy's office. She has her own business. So she's like, we're going to go to mommy's office and play for an hour, and then we're coming back. And he had said, no, we're at school. We're going to school. So she thought, oh my gosh, visual app. So she got it out. She rearranged things and showed him that, mommy's office, play with blah, 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 go back to whatever their preschool was named. And so he saw that, and he said, okay, we go to mommy's office and then school. Hopped in the car, went to her office, went back to school, no problems at all. Now, before she had used this visual schedule, that would have been a full-on fight with her son. It would have been a meltdown, refusals, screaming all the way to mom's office, and all of the anxiety was taken away, and the predictability was given to that kid. He knew, he could see on this app, oh, okay, these are my expectations. These are what I'm doing. I will go back. I think it was Mighty Chipmunks is his pre-K name. We are going back to Mighty Chipmunks. And so he was okay with the transition. And she had said, she's a little dramatic. She would let me say this too. We laugh about this all the time. But she was like, oh my gosh, this was the best thing that's ever happened to us, because this would have been a full-on fight.
I'm glad Mom asked that question. And so Beth, who asked the question, hopefully that's like a good resource that you could use if your kiddo struggles with changes to the visual schedule. How would a parent, I know you can't think of that particular app, but what would a parent search for? Like,
oh my gosh, maybe just Google, like, I don't know, Autism Visual Schedule app or Visual Schedule app, something like that.
Great.
I know there are a lot out there. I just couldn't tell you the names. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure there's tons of choices. And it sounds like they can be pretty customized to the activities or tasks that a parent needs to do. And I'm a big fan of like clip art and Velcro, little squares of Velcro. If you want to make your own and you don't want to use the screen for whatever reason, you can get a little clever with it.
Yeah, and it's all about what works for your family. So in that situation, if she had the traditional version, the chances of her having a picture of her office to really quickly switch out, I mean, that's unlikely. She probably doesn't carry around a picture of her office, But on the app, she was like, oh my gosh, let me get the app. Quickly moved things around and showed him the app and showed him his new schedule, and he saw it and he was like, okay, I'm okay with this outcome. I get to go back to school.
That's wonderful. So 2 follow-up questions to that. And if you're just joining, this is Molly Johnson, the Autism Consultant. We're talking about ways to support our kiddos with autism through common challenges. Feel free to pop a question in the comments if you have one. So I oftentimes will use a visual timer with my, more typical kiddos to let them know time is almost up and now time is up. Do you find that any version of that is equally helpful for these children?
Oh, I think visual timers are wonderful. I highly recommend them as well. I do not actually recommend the timer that comes on our phone that to kids, it just looks like changing numbers. Those numbers might mean nothing to your child, but if there's a visual representation, again, there are 1,000,001 apps for this.
Like red light or green light.
Now, I know for this one, you type in the App Store visual timer. I don't know about the visual schedule, but this one, just type in visual timer, ton of free ones. But basically, you want a very visual representation of something moving and showing your child that the amount of time is going down. Something like a sand timer that you flip upside down, that's also a version of a visual timer, and that's okay as well to use. But showing the child that the time is getting smaller and smaller, and they might not understand that concept in the beginning, but if you transition every time when the sand is out or when the timer goes off, if you transition every time, your child's going to learn that after a handful of times, as long as you're consistent with moving on when the timer goes off. And I actually have another story about this. Do you care if I tell another quick story?
No, go for it.
Okay, so one of my clients have been working on timers, a visual timer on her phone, an app with her son. And one thing that her son absolutely loves is PetSmart and going to the fish. He loves the fish section, but when it's time to walk away, when it's time to move away and leave PetSmart, he does not want to, and it's a time where she sees a lot of challenging behaviors. So, they've been using a visual timer at home. She thought when she got to PetSmart, okay, I'm gonna try this and see if it works outside the home. As soon as it went off, he turned and walked away. She didn't even have to say anything. And this was something that every single time she went to PetSmart, it was refusal behaviors when it was trying to walk away from the fish. So it's little moments like that that's life-changing for a parent that deals with it every single time. And not only is it a challenging behavior, but you also have an audience because you're at a public place. And I'm not saying care what people think, but we all know that you feel this sense of shame when people are staring at you. So it took away so much anxiety from that mom in that moment. It was such a big deal for her and her family.
That's awesome. I love it. I love your stories. I love these parents that these little gems of things that can make life easier.
Well, it's just a coincidence that both of those things just happened.
Happened, right? Well, lucky for us.
And of course, they send me a message when something happens. They're like, "Oh my gosh, you're right." I'm like, "Okay, right? I'll just tell you this just for fun."
Awesome. Well, and I will sometimes with my kiddos have parents take pictures of their child doing the various steps, and then the visual schedule or even the storybook that we put together is, we just read the story over and over. Here's what we do. So it can be sort of a generic, clip art type photo or picture in an app, but it can be really specific to your child. Again, that's not a techie version. You can't make changes with it necessarily in the moment, but kids sometimes like to see themselves, doing the steps. So I don't know if that holds true for the kiddos that you work with.
It's dependent on every child. So I do have a client who her son is very literal. So in the picture, I know they have a breakfast picture, a little visual of him. I think it's him eating breakfast. But he was eating something like pancakes or waffles in that picture. And so he wants that every time. So they actually had to change it. Yeah, so they had to change it to more generic things. Or same thing with picking out the outfit. The shirt and the shorts. He wanted the same thing as in the picture every single day. So totally dependent on whatever the kid, just read your kid, pay attention to how your kid's responding and adjust as needed.
And it is going to take a little trial and error, which is another frustrating thing for us. But once we find it, it'll be really helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a really broad question. How do I teach my child something new? I know you touched on this at the beginning. Once you give a general answer, I'd love to then make it more specific with potty. That's a big skill. So I don't know if you want to do that separate or together, but maybe general first and specific after that.
Okay. So going back to skill development, like I talked about earlier, we're taking a big skill and we're breaking it down into much more smaller, much more manageable pieces. And we're going to add in a visual support if we can. We're going to add in lots of modeling. We're going to add in some type of reward system to not only reward full success, overall success, but also, you know, the child participating and attempting. Because if a child keeps attempting something, but they're never getting anything out of it, they're probably eventually going to catch on that I get nothing out of this. I'm done. I'm walking away and I'm not coming back to this. So we want to reward, you know, approaching something and being willing to try something as well. So let's take potty training. I mean, oh gosh, potty training has so many steps. So this is an easy one to break down. You know, other things, it's like, oh, that maybe just has 2 steps, 2 skills in it. But you have to go into a new location, the bathroom. You have to pull down your pants, pull down your underwear, sit on something, do your business, wipe, pull everything up, flush, wash your hands. So there's actually a lot of steps that go with this. So I always recommend to parents, before you even start potty training, the most important stage is preparing your child, because we also know that a lot of autistic kids or individuals, not just kids, are resistant to change. It's something new. And if you think about it, it's confusing. We tell them, hey, pee, poop, and pull up your diaper for, you know, their whole 2, 3, 4 years of life. And one day we're like, hey, just kidding. Now you have to go sit on this really hard, cold toilet. Surprise. That's a shock.
It doesn't seem like a fair trade to them, right?
Yeah, so the preparation stage is your most important. And I tell parents, take at least 2 weeks to just normalize the potty and normalize people going. Show a million different models. So at bedtime, one of the books that I'm putting in every single night at bedtime is going to be about potty training. I'm going to show different cartoons on YouTube to my child about potty training. I'm going to have the child see mom or sister in the bathroom going potty. Now I say mom over dad because whether it's a girl or boy, we want them to, I don't know if you teach this too, but I teach sit on the potty for everything, because that makes going poop a lot easier once we move on to poop after potty.
You never know which one's gonna come.
Yeah, so we're helping ourselves out in the future with that. But seeing as many models as possible, normalizing it, talking about the language, the potty, the toilet, the bathroom, whatever it may be. When mom or sister goes to the bathroom on the toilet, having your child who you're going to teach, having them flush the toilet to get used to this new noise. It's a new noise. Things go away. Things disappear. And then let's see. Oh, and then also I recommend having the parents change the child on the floor of whatever bathroom they pick. They pick one bathroom in the house. So now your role the next 2 weeks, on top of normalizing everything with the toilet, is changing their diaper on the floor of the bathroom. If they poop, try to dump what you can in the bathroom. Try to have them flush the toilet.
And that's because we're now associating. This is where we go for this function, before we add in all the other steps of doing it the new way.
Yeah, it's teaching them the new expectation without having them engage in it yet, without putting any pressure on them yet. We're just warming them up to this new expectation of, this is the room, this is the only room we take care of our business in. Because, you know, think about it. We don't take care of our business on the floor of our bedroom or on the floor of the living room where mom and dad usually change kids. So once we want to look at potty training, that's when we need to think about moving the kid in the bathroom, putting them down on the floor of the bathroom, changing them there, letting them know, this is where I take care of my business. We step away. It is a private moment. We get our privacy. We go to this bathroom every time.
I love that, and thank you. And we have so many people joining. So if you're just popping in, we're talking about supporting kiddos with autism to approach the potty training process. And here's where I think we're talking about kids really viewing this differently. So when I help a family with a typical kiddo approach the process, of course preparation is going to be important for all kids. But let's say that a more typical kiddo does not know how to pull their pants down, you know, push their pants down, pull their pants up yet. that might not be as big of a concern for me in that scenario. We might be able to be practicing that while we're practicing the potty. But is it fair to say, in your opinion, since everything has to be broken down into more pieces, would you have that family focus on that individual skill first of manipulating their pants before they even think about moving on to the process itself?
Yeah, so actually, so I would have the kid wear more elastic type of pants. If they have fine motor issues, I would have them focus on those wearing elastic pants, you know, loose sweatpants, loose shorts. And then when I'm moving the child into the bathroom to change them on the floor for the 2 weeks while I'm preparing the child, I am encouraging the child to pull them down. I am trying to encourage them to participate. I'm making it fun. But if you think about that, the pulling pants down is the first step, like you just said, of potty training. So if we can get them to see success with the first step, I mean, we're already seeing progress with potty training.
Right.
And then once we get them in front of the toilet, and when we actually want them to attempt to sit there, you know, they'll know how to pull down their pants, and that will be something familiar to them in that moment. So they won't maybe be as resistant to sitting on this new thing, because that motion, that activity of pulling your pants down is now familiar to them.
Right, excellent. And so what I'm hearing, and hopefully parents are hearing, and I'm sure they already know this if they've been coping with this, but you're going to need a lot of patience, because it's frustrating to see a process that could maybe take another child, 3 days. Oh, now you're telling me we need 2 weeks just to prepare. But the magic that we've been talking about is in the preparation. So that's just going to be really important for that kind of success.
Yeah, and if we were to tell all adults, okay, your new expectation of using the bathroom is now in a different room, in a different way, with different senses, because the toilet's cold and hard. Now we have toilet paper that we have to rub against our body. You would have resistance too. And you would be like, you would think, I've been doing this way my whole life. What do you mean we're doing it different? That's confusing. So we have to give it time. We have to trust the process. And my biggest tip is to take 2+ weeks to just normalize it and set the new expectation before you even ask your child to attempt it.
Got it. Excellent. One other thing I wanted to point out about potty training, and then we have a pretty specific potty question. So when I work, again, with more typical kiddos, we're sometimes having them practice, in the main area of the house. We have a potty out there, maybe it's in the playroom, it's easy access, we don't have to leave the location and stop what we're doing. That can work great for lots of kids, because later it's not too much of a problem for them to take what they've learned and now travel to the bathroom, right? But what I'm hearing you say, for a parent who's supporting a child with autism, it's best to introduce it the way that they always want it to go forever, so that that child doesn't have to make that same pivot that would be easy for another child.
Correct. Correct, because what we know to be a fact about autistic individuals is that changes are hard, they're scary. Introducing something new, even though that seems like a small transition from a toy or from a plastic potty to the real thing, it might be a really overwhelming transition to a child. So whatever the expectation is, whatever you want the final outcome to be, that needs to be the expectation from day one. But there are things you can add. There are little attachments, and I do recommend these attachments. Again, I wish I knew the name. It's all over Amazon, so you can find it, but
we'll call it a sexual ladder with insert, right?
Yeah, there's like a cushion you sit on, and then also I recommend the one that comes with there are little armrests for it, and then a little stool for your feet. And that's for a few reasons. Number one, the toilet's big, and your child might have balance issues. It's not uncommon for autistic kids to have balance problems. So if they have armrests, that's going to stabilize them, which makes them feel more comfortable. And if they're comfortable, they're more likely to be relaxed enough to pee or poop in the toilet. Also, the stool where their feet are, again, it's giving their body some stability, so their feet aren't just hanging and dangling. They feel like they have stability. And then also, a little TMI here, but think about when we go number 2, we're pushing. We need resistance, so that kid, if it's elevated and they have a stool for their feet to be on, we're providing resistance for their body to work more naturally.
For sure. Excellent. Wonderful. Okay. We're almost coming to the end of our questions. So if anybody has one, pop it in there. I read this in advance, but now I forget. So I don't know if we covered it yet, but I just want to make sure we don't miss it. But Mom asked, my 3.5-year-old son is autistic, and I'm self-conscious about the fact that he's not potty trained or even close. He's never peed on the potty. He said several times that he gets frustrated because he seems to have no idea what he's supposed to do. I consider the no pants method because we aren't making any progress, but he's very uncomfortable without pants. Even shorts can be stressful on a bad day. My next thought was to let him be dressed in underwear and pants and just prepare for many loads of laundry, but being wet can upset him as well. Any tips for potty training without trauma? That's a lot of things to think about. He doesn't like any of those scenarios.
Yes. Yeah, so I would still stand with what I said, with at least 2 weeks to prep your child. Start letting them see many different models of how to use the toilet. Start using it at bedtime for a story time. Start changing your child on the floor of the bathroom. Start having them flush the toilet every single time you go, or every single time you can dump what you can of theirs in the toilet. So we want to normalize it for 2 weeks. Then when you officially start, I would definitely recommend that you use a visual schedule, regardless of if you're potty training or not, but build potty breaks into your child's visual schedule so they see it is an expectation that I'm going to sit on that toilet, that I'm relieving myself at these times, that is my expectation. So it's not a surprise when you are taking your child to the bathroom. And then let's see, what else would I do? I had in my head.
Would you have diapers or pull-ups factoring in anywhere? Or is it important for them to really separate?
Yeah, this is what I was going to say. As soon as your child wakes up, you take them immediately. First thing on their visual schedule is a trip to the potty. You set them on the potty. Whether they go or not, you are taking off the diaper or pull-up for the rest of the day. And daytime, they're in big boy, big girl underwear. So then you're going to want to think about accidents. You'll want to think ahead. We don't want to spend our days cleaning up too much of a mess. So if the weather's nice, I know I'm going to be spending the majority of the day outside, because it's a lot easier to just take a hose and spray that mess down outside. And if we're going to be inside the majority of the day, I might be blocking off hallways and the kitchen way so that I'm containing this child to the living room where the hardwood floor is, let's say, so that I'm containing some of the mess a little bit and making it easier on myself. And a lot of kids, watch your child too the next couple of days, because a lot of kids are showing signs that they're about to go. They might look around, they get that suspicious look, like something's about to go down, and they might go find a corner and like quietly go away to the corner. Or do a little wiggle dance. Sometimes there's like a little wiggle dance before a pee. When you see your child's sign, that is your trigger, mom and dad's warning to immediately take your child, sit them on the toilet, because the opportunity is there. They have to go. Their body has to relieve itself in that moment. Their brain knows that sensation means I'm about to go. Use this as an opportunity to have a win. Take them immediately, sit them on the toilet.
And I'm guessing, based on what you said earlier, you're going to want to pick a very simple phrase and keep it the same every time, and don't overload them with words. Like, I'll say, take them by the hand, say, it's time to pee, and we go sit down, or whatever it's going to be. Does that be true?
Yeah, and if I take their hand and say it's time to pee, I walk them, sit them on the toilet, and once they're on the toilet, I say that same thing. It's time to pee. I'm using a very simple phrase, and I'm very consistent with only using that. And like I said earlier, it's so common for us to, word vomit. And we're like, oh, maybe they can't understand me. Let me explain it a different way. And then we end up really just hurting the situation. But we all do it. We're all guilty of that.
Right. Yes, for sure. And then we've talked a lot about rewards. So, I try with more typical kids to get this done without physical rewards if we can, if praise and being proud is enough. But it sounds like from everything you've said tonight, for a child with autism, that sort of immediate sort of payoff to attach this desirable new behavior to whatever the thing is going to be really key for these families.
It just is so dependent on each child. Sometimes for some kids, we might have a picture on the wall of a breakdown, the breakdown of pull your pants down, pull your underwear down, sit on the toilet, pee, wipe, pull up your pants. And you know, you might have a token board type of system where every time they do each one, there's a Velcro piece next to it. You give them their star token and they're satisfied putting that token on. Sometimes just getting that star or personalizing it, maybe it's little pictures of monsters that you're putting on there and letting them do each one. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes they need a physical reward. I think it's going to be so dependent on each kid. Some kids love mom and dad's attention and connection more than anything in the world. So, you know, your excited voice and little tickle on the stomach, sometimes that works as well. But it's all about finding what's going to motivate that child and then putting that into place.
Excellent. Okay. I do not see any questions in the chat, but we have covered so much already. Maybe we did a great job. Thank you so much for your time and your knowledge. If I were struggling with this as a parent, I think I'd feel less overwhelmed just from watching that. So hopefully that's how parents feel. However, if you're feeling like, well, a lot of what you said is, it depends, or a lot of great ideas, but I have no idea how to, you know, put them into practice in everyday life and have the patience for it. That's what you're here for, you know, to work with parents. So let parents know where they can find you. Where are you on social media? How can they learn about your podcast and your inner circle?
Yeah, so my Instagram, that's where I hang out the most. My Instagram handle is the Autism Consultant. So follow me, reach out to me. I never turn down any conversation in the DM, so reach out to me with anything. And then like you said, yes, I have a program which is the Autism Parent Inner Circle. It is a group program where parents come to me with anything and everything that is going on at home that they're wanting to move past. And I help you understand why it's happening, how your child's brain works, what they need in order to learn and move on from a situation and get the support they need. And I give action plans of exactly what to do to move forward and fully support their child with that. You know, it is a group program, which a lot of people are a little iffy about, but what you end up finding once you join is you love hearing other people ask questions as well, because they ask questions that you didn't even know you had a question to. You know, with people that I work one-on-one with, they only ask me what's going on and what's right in front of them. But when they hear other parents' questions, it brings up this new amount of value and information that they didn't even know they needed yet. So it's just my way of supporting parents and helping them support their child.
Wonderful. And the podcast, did you touch on that?
I'm sorry?
The podcast?
Oh, yeah. So that's the Autism Consultant as well. iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher.
Your website. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much. I know I've learned a lot. I hope our families have too. And I know your time is precious. So I'll let everybody get back to what is left in their evening. Next week, we'll be back with Dr. Kevin Britt of Focus Chiropractic to talk about how chiropractic can help with colic, ADD, ADHD, allergies, all sorts of things that we may not know can be tied to that. And helped by that. So we'll be back next week for anybody that can join us. And thank you so much, Molly Johnson.
Awesome. Thank you. I enjoyed being here.
All right, great. Everybody have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.